Hey guys, tonight we are wading into something cold, golden, and older than most countries. The wonderful, foamy, faintly ridiculous world of beer. Every single kind of it. Not just the fizzy yellow stuff your uncle defends like it is a member of the family, but the whole sprawling family tree from crisp lagers to stouts, so thick and dark they could double as motor oil. Before we get comfortable, a genuine thank you to the listener who suggested tonight's topic. I love that you sent this in, and honestly requests like yours are what keep this whole thing going, so thank you. If you enjoy these slow rambling deep dives, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is, because somehow it is always beer o'clock somewhere. Now dim the lights, switch on a fan for that soft white noise, get comfortable, and maybe set down whatever you happen to be drinking before you spill it. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered why some beers are pale and some look like liquid midnight? Why one glass tastes like fresh bread and another tastes like a pine forest had an argument with a grapefruit? Who decided that monks should be in charge of the strongest beers on earth? Why does one sip make you sleepy and another make you weirdly opinionated about hops? And could you actually tell a pilsner from a porter in the dark? Or would you just nod politely and pray no one asks a follow-up question? Well, tonight you are going to find out. Congratulations. You have just walked into the biggest, strangest, most overwhelming beer hall ever assembled, where every style ever brewed is lined up and waiting. You have no idea what any of them are. The menu is 9 pages long, and the bartender, for once, has all the time in the world. Let's begin. Before you can understand every type of beer, you need to know what beer even is, and the answer is gloriously simple. At its heart, beer is just 4 things: water, grain, hops, and yeast. That is it. Everything else, every fancy label and every $12 can with a cartoon octopus on it, is just a variation on those 4 ingredients arguing among themselves. Grain gives you sugar, yeast eats the sugar, and politely produces alcohol as a thank you note. Hops add bitterness and aroma, and water makes up the rest, which is most of it. Think of it as a very old, very forgiving recipe that humans have been quietly fine-tuning for roughly the last 10,000 years. Let's slow down and actually meet these 4 ingredients, because they are far stranger than they look. Start with grain, usually barley, which on its own is about as exciting as a handful of birdseed. To wake it up, brewers soak it, let it sprout, then dry it in a kiln, a process called malting. This convinces the grain to unlock all its hidden sugars, like a vending machine that finally accepts your crumpled dollar on the 5th try. Roast that malt lightly, and you get pale, bready flavours. Roast it hard, and you get chocolate, coffee, and the colour of a moonless night. Every shade of beer you've ever seen starts right here, in a kiln, with grain being gently persuaded to become delicious. Next comes the water, which sounds boring until you realise it is most of what you're drinking. The mineral content of local water quietly shaped entire beer styles for centuries. Soft water made delicate golden lagers possible, while hard, mineral-rich water gave certain regions their bitter, sharp ales. Brewers back then had no idea why their water worked. They just knew that beer brewed in one town tasted magnificent, and beer brewed 20 miles away tasted like sad pond runoff. Today, brewers can adjust their water down to the molecule, which is a bit like discovering your grandmother's secret sauce was just tap water she got lucky with. Then there are hops, the green cone-shaped flowers that give beer its bitterness, its aroma, and roughly 90% of its personality. Hops are the seasoning, the drama, the reason one beer smells like a pine forest and another smells like someone dropped a fruit basket. They also act as a natural preservative, which is why they became so important once people wanted beer to survive longer than a weekend. Without hops, beer would be a flat, sweet, faintly bready liquid that spoiled almost immediately. With them, beer became something people would cross oceans for and occasionally start arguments over. And finally, the true hero of the whole operation, yeast. This microscopic little organism does all the actual work while the humans stand around feeling proud. Yeast eats the sugar from the malt and produces two things we care about deeply: alcohol and carbon dioxide, which is the fizz. For most of history, nobody even knew yeast existed. They just noticed that if you left sugary grain water alone in the right spot, it magically turned into beer, which they reasonably assumed was a gift from the gods rather than the digestive habits of a fungus too small to see. So there you have it. Grain, water, hops, and yeast. 4 humble ingredients that, combined in 1,000 different ways, produce the entire dizzying menu we're about to explore. Master those 4 and the whole beer world stops being intimidating. So let's start with the single decision that splits all beer into 2 great families. Here is the secret that instantly makes you sound clever at any bar. Almost every beer on earth is either an ale or a lager, and the difference comes down to yeast and temperature. Ales are brewed with yeast that likes to work warm and fast, floating near the top, producing fruity, spicy, bold flavours in a matter of days. Lagers use yeast that sinks to the bottom and works slow and cold, like a coworker who flatly refuses to be rushed, resulting in a cleaner, crisper, more patient beer. That single fork in the road, warm and quick versus cold and slow, is the reason your hoppy IPA and your crisp pilsner feel like completely different species. Let's talk about the ale yeast first, because it is the older and, frankly, the more dramatic of the two. Early yeast likes it warm, roughly the temperature of a cozy room, and it works with the manic energy of someone who drank too much coffee before a deadline. It bubbles furiously at the top of the tank, churning out beer in a matter of days, and while it works, it throws off all sorts of extra flavours. Fruit, spice, banana, clove, and a general sense of liveliness. These flavours are technically byproducts, the yeast equivalent of loudly talking while it works, but brewers learned to love them. For nearly all of human history, every single beer ever made was an ale, simply because nobody had figured out the alternative yet. That alternative arrived thanks to a happy accident in the cool caves of Central Europe. Somewhere in the misty past, a strain of yeast adapted to work in the cold, sinking to the bottom of the tank and fermenting slowly over weeks instead of days. The word lager even comes from the German word for storage, because these beers were stashed away in cold cellars to quietly finish their business. Working cold and slow meant the yeast kept its mouth shut, producing almost none of those loud fruity flavours. The result was clean, crisp, and refreshing. A beer that tasted of little more than bread and hops and cold clear water. It was the introvert of the beer world, and people absolutely could not get enough of it. The tricky part is that lagers demand patience, and patience is expensive. An ale can be ready to drink in a week or 2, but a proper lager might need a month or more of cold storage before it is any good. Imagine running a business where half your products take 4 times as long to make and require a freezing cold room the entire time. Before refrigeration was invented, this meant lagers could only really be brewed in cold places at cold times of year, which is why they stayed a regional specialty for so long. Once refrigeration came along in the 1800s, everything changed, and the lager quietly began its takeover of the entire planet. Here is a fun bit of irony to keep in your back pocket. People assume dark beer is heavy and pale beer is light, and that ales are strong while lagers are weak. All of that is nonsense. You can have a pitch-black lager that drinks like water, and a pale golden ale that knocks you flat. Colour, strength, and style are all separate decisions. The only thing that truly makes a beer an ale or a lager is which yeast did the work and how cold it was while doing it. So remember the fork in the road. Warm and quick gives you ales. Cold and slow gives you lagers. Everything else we talk about tonight branches off from this one quiet choice, made by yeast too small to see. So let's follow the lager branch first, starting with the beer that conquered the entire planet. If beer handed out a most influential award, the Pilsner would win it in a landslide. Born in the town of Pilsen in the 1840s, this pale golden lager was such a runaway hit that nearly every mass-market beer you have ever seen is basically still trying to be it. Crisp, clear, refreshing, with a clean bitterness from the hops and a golden glow that looked almost magical to people used to murky brown ale. When you picture a generic beer in a frosty glass, you're picturing a Pilsner or one of its countless imitators. It is the beer equivalent of a plain white t-shirt, simple, everywhere, and secretly very hard to do well. To understand why the Pilsner exploded onto the scene, you have to picture what beer looked like beforehand. For most of history, beer was cloudy, brownish, inconsistent, and often kind of a gamble. You poured a mug and squinted at it, hoping tonight's batch was one of the good ones. Then the town of Pilsen, fed up with dumping barrels of spoiled beer into the streets, hired a Bavarian brewer, gave him fancy new pale malt and soft local water, and let him loose. Out came a beer so clear and golden it practically glowed, served in the newly affordable clear glassware of the era. People had never seen anything like it. It was as if beer had suddenly switched from black and white television to full colour. The flavour was the other half of the miracle. A good Pilsner is crisp and clean, with a firm, snappy bitterness from noble hops that lingers just long enough to make you want another sip. There is a light bready sweetness underneath, but nothing gets in the way of that refreshing, thirst-quenching finish. It is the sort of beer engineered to be drunk, not merely admired, the kind you could enjoy several of on a warm afternoon without your palate ever getting tired. It hit that magic sweet spot of being interesting enough to notice and easy enough to keep drinking, which is the holy grail of beverages. Naturally, once the world got a taste, everybody wanted in. Brewers across Europe and eventually across the entire globe scrambled to copy the style with wildly varying degrees of success and honesty. This is where things get a little cheeky, because a huge number of beers proudly calling themselves Pilsners today are pale imitations in the most literal sense. They borrowed the golden colour and the crisp finish, but quietly ditched most of that beautiful hop bitterness to appeal to as many people as possible. It is a bit like every restaurant claiming to serve authentic wood-fired pizza when the oven is clearly a microwave with ambition. A true classic Pilsner, whether the softer Czech version or the drier, snappier German one, is a genuinely elegant thing. The Czech style leans a touch richer and more golden, with a rounder malt character, while the German style is paler, drier, and even more crisply bitter. Both share that same clean, refreshing backbone that made the original such a sensation. Drinking a well-made Pilsner is a quiet reminder that simple does not mean easy. With so few flavours to hide behind, there is nowhere for a mistake to lurk. Any flaw in the brewing sticks out immediately, like a wrong note in an otherwise silent room. So the humble pilsner is not just another beer on the menu. It is the ancestor, the template, the beer that taught the world what a golden lager could be, and the model that billions of cans still chase to this day. But not every pale lager wants to be quite that bitter, which brings us to its softer German cousin. Not far from the pilsner lives a beer that decided bitterness was a bit much. The Helles, a German pale lager whose name literally means bright. Where the pilsner leans crisp and hoppy, the Helles leans soft, bready, and gently sweet, like a pilsner that went to a spa and came back deeply relaxed. It is the beer Bavarians drink by the litre without blinking, because it is smooth enough to keep up with and mild enough to never pick a fight with your dinner. If the pilsner is the loud, confident cousin, the Helles is the easygoing one who never causes drama at the family reunion. The story of the Helles is a lovely little tale of regional stubbornness. When the golden pilsner swept across Europe, the brewers of Munich watched their customers drift toward this crisp new golden import and realized they needed a golden beer of their own, or risk being left behind. But being Bavarian, they refused to simply copy the hoppy Czech style. Instead, they crafted a pale lager that leaned into soft malt rather than sharp bitterness, a beer built for their own gentle, food-loving, litre-swinging drinking culture. It was less a rival to the pilsner and more a polite counter-argument, made entirely of bread and sunshine. Take a sip and you will notice what is missing as much as what is there. The aggressive hop bite of a pilsner steps aside, replaced by a soft, rounded flavour of fresh bread crust, a whisper of honey sweetness, and a clean lager finish that never overstays its welcome. It is not sweet exactly, just gentle, like the difference between a firm handshake and a friendly pat on the shoulder. There is just enough hop presence in the background to keep everything balanced, but the hops here are staff, not management. The malt runs the show, and it runs it kindly. This gentleness is precisely the point, because of how the Helles is meant to be consumed. In Munich beer halls and beer gardens, this is the everyday beer, served in enormous glass mugs and enjoyed slowly across long afternoons under chestnut trees. A beer you plan to drink by the litre cannot afford to be exhausting. Something too bitter or too intense would wear you out halfway through, but a Helles is engineered for the long haul, refreshing sip after refreshing sip, keeping you company through conversation, pretzels, and the occasional Oompa band without ever demanding attention. It is the marathon runner of beers, pacing itself so you can too. You will find a few close relatives wandering the same neighbourhood. The Dortmunder export, for example, is a slightly stronger, slightly more mineral pale lager, born in an industrial German city where thirsty factory workers wanted something a touch bolder to reward a hard shift. It splits the difference between the crisp pilsner and the soft Helles, a diplomatic middle child that never quite got as famous as its siblings, but earned a loyal following all the same. These pale lagers all live in the same gentle family, differing by little more than a nudge of hops here or a splash of minerals there. What makes the Helles quietly brilliant is the same thing that makes it easy to overlook. It does not dazzle you. There is no explosion of tropical fruit, no punishing bitterness, no towering strength to brag about. It simply tastes clean, soft, and satisfying, over and over, which turns out to be one of the hardest things in all of brewing to pull off. Making a beer with big, flashy flavours is one thing. Making one that tastes of almost nothing yet leaves you reaching for another is a genuine art. Of course, once brewers had mastered pale lagers, someone inevitably asked what happens if we make an enormous amount of it very cheaply. Somewhere along the way, the elegant pilsner got adapted, lightened, stretched, and mass-produced into the beer that now fills stadiums, coolers, and questionable decisions everywhere. The standard pale lager. This is the fizzy yellow beer you know from every commercial, featuring a beach and impossibly happy friends. Brewers often add rice or corn to lighten the body and the cost, creating something crisp, cold, and deeply uncontroversial. Beer snobs love to sneer at it, but there is a reason it outsells everything else on the planet by a mile. It is refreshing, reliable, and does exactly what it says on the can. Let's be honest about how this beer came to rule the world, because it is a story of ruthless practicality rather than romance. As brewing became a giant industry, the goal shifted from crafting the most flavorful beer to crafting the most agreeable one, a beer that would offend absolutely no one across an entire country of different tastes. The winning formula turned out to be simple. Keep it pale, keep it cold, keep it fizzy, and turn the flavour way, way down. What you lose in character, you gain in universal appeal, and appeal is what sells trainloads of the stuff. That is where the rice and corn come in, and this is the part beer snobs clutch their pearls over. Adding these cheaper grains alongside the barley lightens the body, softens the flavour, and thins everything out into that pale, clean, crushable liquid we all recognise. Purists call this cutting corners, but it is really just a deliberate design choice aimed at maximum drinkability at minimum cost. It is the beer equivalent of a reliable economy car. Nobody writes poems about it, but it starts every morning, sips very little fuel, and gets you exactly where you need to go without any fuss. The genius of the mass-market lager is that it is almost impossible to have a strong opinion about while you're drinking it. It is cold, it is wet, it has a faint bready sweetness and the gentlest whisper of bitterness, and then it is gone, leaving you ready for the next one. It pairs with everything precisely because it tastes of almost nothing, sliding effortlessly alongside greasy burgers, spicy wings, questionable ballpark hot dogs, and every barbecue you have ever attended. It is not trying to be a flavour experience, it is trying to be refreshment, and at that single job it is world class. Here is the part the snobs conveniently forget while they swirl their imperial stouts and grumble. Making a genuinely clean, consistent mass-market lager is fiendishly difficult. When a beer has this few flavours to hide behind, every single flaw becomes glaringly obvious. A giant brewery producing millions of identical cans, each one tasting exactly the same in every corner of the country, is pulling off a feat of quality control that would make most tiny craft breweries weep. There is nowhere for a mistake to hide in a beer this delicate, which makes the boring consistency itself a quiet triumph of engineering. And there is no shame in enjoying it, despite what the person with the elaborate beard at the end of the bar might imply. The right beer depends entirely on the moment. On a blistering summer day, after mowing the lawn at the 7th inning, or handed to you from a cooler at a friend's cookout, an ice-cold, no-nonsense pale lager is very often exactly what the moment calls for. Not every meal needs to be a 12-course feast. Sometimes you just want a slice of pizza, and sometimes you just want a cold beer that asks nothing of you. Still, if you nudge that lager slightly darker and richer, you land somewhere a lot more interesting. Take a pale lager, toast the grains a little longer, and you get something with a warm amber glow and a gentle toasty sweetness, the Vienna lager. This is the beer that tastes like autumn looks, all copper and caramel without ever getting heavy or overwhelming. It was wildly popular in the 1800s, nearly went extinct, and then quietly survived in, of all places, Mexico, where it influenced some famous amber-coloured lagers you have probably had with a lime jammed in the top. It sits comfortably in the middle of the beer spectrum, too flavourful to be boring, too smooth to be intimidating. The magic of the Vienna lager is all in the malt, and specifically in how far the brewer decides to toast it. Remember, roast the grain a little, and you get pale and bready. Roast it a lot, and you get dark and coffee-like. The Vienna lager lives in that gorgeous middle zone where the malt has been kilned just enough to develop flavours of toast, light caramel and a faint nuttiness, giving the beer its signature copper colour. It is the difference between plain white bread and a slice of bread toasted to that perfect golden brown, still soft in the middle but warm and rich around the edges. What keeps it from tipping into heavy territory is the fact that it is still, at heart, a lager. That cold, slow, patient yeast keeps everything clean and crisp underneath all that toasty flavour, so the beer never becomes a chewy, filling ordeal. You get the warm, comforting taste of the malt with the easygoing, refreshing finish of a lager, which is a genuinely lovely combination. It is like wearing a cosy sweater that somehow also keeps you cool, an object that logically should not exist but that you are very glad does. The history here has a strange twist worth savouring. The Vienna lager was born in its namesake city and enjoyed a golden age in the 1800s, but back home in Europe it slowly faded, elbowed aside by paler, trendier styles until it nearly disappeared entirely. The plot twist is that the style had already sailed across the ocean to Mexico, carried by Austrian brewers during a brief and bizarre period of European influence there. In Mexico it took root, adapted and survived, which is why some of the most famous amber Mexican lagers you can buy today are direct descendants of a nearly extinct Austrian recipe. History is weird like that. This makes the Vienna lager a fantastic gateway beer for anyone who thinks they only like the pale fizzy stuff, but is quietly curious about more flavour. It does not ambush you with bitterness or overwhelm you with strength. It simply offers a warm, malty, slightly sweet handshake and lets you decide how you feel about it. 9 times out of 10, people are pleasantly surprised discovering that beer can taste of caramel and toast without becoming a heavy, sludgy commitment. It is the perfect stepping stone from the shallow end of beer into the deeper, more flavourful waters beyond. Picture the ideal moment for one. A crisp autumn evening, leaves crunching underfoot, a chill in the air that makes a warmer flavour feel right, but not so cold that you want something thick and boozy. That is Vienna lager weather, a beer that matches the season in your glass. It pairs beautifully with roasted meats, grilled vegetables, and pretty much any food that also benefits from a little caramelized browning, which is to say most of the good food there is. And speaking of toasty autumn beers, there is one that an entire festival was built around. Every autumn, millions of people put on suspenders and raise giant mugs to a beer style that was basically invented by a scheduling problem, the Märzen. Long ago, before refrigeration, brewers could not make beer in the hot summer months because the warm weather let wild yeasts and bacteria spoil everything. So they brewed a sturdy batch in March, which is what Märzen means, and stashed it in cool caves packed with ice to sip slowly through the summer. By the time autumn arrived and brewing could safely resume, the leftovers of that spring batch became the centrepiece of a giant harvest party we now call Oktoberfest. The beer itself was designed for exactly this purpose, which shaped everything about it. Because it needed to survive months of storage, it was brewed a little stronger and a little maltier than an everyday beer, giving it the backbone to age gracefully in those cold caves. The result is a smooth, rich amber lager with a deep, toasty bread crust flavour, a gentle caramel sweetness, and a clean lager finish that keeps it from ever feeling like a chore. It is essentially a beefed-up cousin of the Vienna lager, built for celebration rather than casual sipping. Take a proper mouthful, and you will understand why people travel across the world for this stuff. The flavour is warm and bready. like the crust of a fresh-baked pretzel, with just enough malty sweetness to feel indulgent and just enough hop balance to keep you coming back. Crucially, it is strong enough to feel festive, hovering a touch above your average beer, but smooth and drinkable enough that you can genuinely enjoy it by the litre. This is not an accident. A festival beer has one sacred job, which is to keep an enormous tent full of happy people, happy for many, many hours, and the Märzen performs that duty flawlessly. Here is where things get slightly confusing, so stay with me. The classic amber Märzen was the traditional Oktoberfest beer for well over a century, the deep golden copper brew you picture in those giant glass mugs. But in more recent decades, the official festival in Munich quietly shifted towards serving a paler, lighter, more golden version called a Fest beer, essentially a stronger, more festive Helles. So the beer actually poured at the modern festival today is often the paler one, while the rich amber Märzen lives on mostly through the versions brewed abroad, especially the autumn seasonal beers that flood shelves everywhere come September. It is a small betrayal that most drinkers never even notice. None of that changes what makes the style so wonderful. Whether amber or gold, the Oktoberfest beer represents something lovely. The idea that surviving a long, hard stretch deserves a celebration. The original festival grew out of a royal wedding and a good harvest, a moment of collective relief after the exhausting work of summer, all lubricated by the beer that had been patiently waiting in those caves. There is something deeply human about brewing your reward months in advance and trusting your future self to enjoy it, and about turning a simple logistical problem we cannot brew in summer into one of the biggest parties on the planet. So the next time you clink a heavy mug and shout something cheerful you only half understand, spare a thought for those old brewers. They were not trying to invent a global festival. They were just trying to keep their beer from spoiling in the summer heat. And in solving that humble problem, they accidentally created a tradition that now draws millions of people in silly hats to drink amber lager under the autumn sky. That same trick of brewing something strong and sturdy leads us straight into the world of the bock. When monks decided that fasting seasons would be much more bearable with a strong, nourishing beer to sip on, they gave us the bock, a hearty lager brewed to be rich, malty, and surprisingly powerful. The name bock means billy goat, which is why so many of these beers have a goat glaring at you from the label, as if daring you to underestimate it. Bocks range from dark gold to deep brown, full of bread and caramel flavours, and strong enough that a couple will politely remind you they exist. Monks nicknamed one version liquid bread and drank it to survive weeks without solid food, which is either pure genius or a quiet cry for help. The bock is where the lager family finally starts flexing its muscles. Everything we have talked about so far, the crisp pilsner, the gentle Helles, the toasty Märzen, has been about balance and easy drinking. The bock throws some of that restraint out the window in favour of richness. Brewers pile in more malt, which means more sugar, which means the yeast has more to work with and produces a stronger, fuller, more warming beer. The flavours deepen into dark bread, toffee, dried fruit, and a gentle caramel sweetness, all wrapped in that clean lager smoothness that keeps it from feeling like a heavy ale. The monastery connection is the heart of the bock story, and it is a delightfully sneaky one. During long fasting periods like Lent, monks were forbidden from eating solid food, which is a rough deal for anyone who enjoys not being hungry for weeks on end. Their clever loophole was that liquids did not count, and beer, conveniently, is a liquid. So they brewed an especially strong malty, calorie-packed beer to sustain themselves through the fast, reasoning that if they had to suffer, they could at least suffer comfortably. This nourishing brew earned the nickname liquid bread, and honestly, given the circumstances, you cannot blame them one bit. The name itself has a charming bit of linguistic silliness behind it. The style is often traced to a German town called Einbeck, famous for its strong beers, and when Bavarian brewers adopted it, their accent mangled the pronunciation until Einbeck slowly slurred into Einbock, which happens to mean a billy goat. The brewers, delighted by the coincidence, leaned all the way in, and to this day you will find goats staring out from bock labels everywhere, horns and all. It is a rare case of a beer being named after a pun that survived several centuries and at least one thick regional accent. There is a whole little herd of bock variations worth knowing. The traditional bock is dark, rich and malty. The Maibock or Heller bock is a paler, more golden version brewed to celebrate spring, trading some of the dark malt for a brighter, hoppier character while keeping all the strength. Each one plays with the same core idea, a strong melty lager, while dressing it up for a different occasion or season. They are the beers you reach for when you want something with real presence, a drink that makes you slow down and actually pay attention rather than simply chugging away. The sneaky danger of a good bock is exactly how smooth it can be. All that rich malt and clean lager character can mask a strength that is well above your everyday beer, which means it goes down far more easily than it has any right to. You settle in with what feels like a comforting, bready, dessert-like drink, and only later do you notice that gravity has become a slightly more personal opponent. This is a beer for savouring in a comfortable chair, not for racing through, unless you enjoy surprises. And if a regular bock was strong, the monks were nowhere near finished. If the bock was liquid bread, the doppelbock was liquid bread with ambitions. Doppel means double, and while it is not literally twice as strong, it is noticeably bigger, richer, and more intense, like the bock came back from a long winter of very heavy meals. These beers are deep brown, thick with flavours of dark fruit, toffee, and toasted crust, and strong enough to make an afternoon nap feel less like a choice and more like destiny. German monks brewed them during Lent as sustenance, giving them names that often end in "ater", a little tradition that somehow stuck. Let's talk about those monks again, because they really are the unsung heroes and quiet enablers of strong beer. Having already discovered that beer counted as an acceptable liquid meal during fasting, one particular order of Italian monks who had settled in Munich decided the standard bock simply was not sustaining enough for a proper fast. So they brewed something even bigger, packing in still more malt and coaxing out even more strength and richness, creating a beer so full of body and calories that it could genuinely carry a person through weeks of eating nothing else. It was less a beverage and more a survival ration that happened to taste incredible. The flavour of a good doppelbock is a rich, brooding experience. Imagine the deepest, most comforting flavours of dark bread crust, dried figs and raisins, sticky toffee, and a whisper of dark chocolate, all layered together into something that feels almost chewy, despite being a clean, bottom-fermented lager. There is a warming sweetness to it, a gentle boozy hug rather than a harsh bite, that makes it perfect for slowly sipping on a cold night. This is not a beer you gulp. This is a beer you cradle, ideally somewhere warm, ideally while watching something crackle in a fireplace. The naming tradition is one of the most charming quirks in all of beer. That original monastery brew was called Salvator, roughly meaning saviour, a fitting name for the beer that saved them from starvation. It became so beloved that brewer after brewer created their own doppelbock and paid homage by ending the names with the same ator suffix. To this day you will spot doppelbocks with grand, slightly ridiculous names, all sharing that same ending, a little secret handshake stretching back centuries. It is the beer world's version of a family surname, passed proudly down through generations of very strong, very brown lagers. What makes the doppelbock genuinely fascinating is how it disguises its power. You would expect a beer this strong to taste sharply of alcohol, but a well-made doppelbock hides its strength behind wave after wave of rich malt sweetness. It drinks smooth, warm and dessert-like, which is precisely what makes it so treacherous. The strength does not announce itself in the flavour. It simply waits patiently until you stand up and discover that the room has developed opinions about which way is up. The monks may have brewed it to survive a fast, but modern drinkers should treat it with the healthy respect you would give any deceptively gentle heavyweight. There is something wonderfully absurd about the whole enterprise when you step back. A group of devout monks trying to be more pious and self-denying during a holy season ended up engineering some of the strongest, richest, most indulgent beers ever created, all in the name of restraint. The fasting was supposed to be a hardship, and instead it gave us a legacy of magnificent brown beer named after saviours. If that is not proof that human ingenuity will always find a delicious loophole, nothing is. Now, having gone rich and strong, let's follow the lager family all the way into the dark. People assume all dark beers are heavy, but the German dark lagers are here to politely prove them wrong. The Dunkel, which simply means dark, and the Schwarzbier, which means black beer, both look like they should sit in your stomach like a brick, yet they drink shockingly smooth and clean. You get flavours of chocolate, toasted bread and coffee, but with the crisp, easygoing finish that only a lager can offer. It is the beer version of a person who looks terrifying in photos and turns out to be lovely in person. This is one of the great and delicious misunderstandings in the entire beer world, so let's clear it up once and for all. Colour has almost nothing to do with how heavy or strong a beer feels. A beer gets its dark colour from heavily roasted malt, the same way toast gets darker the longer you leave it in the toaster, but roasting the grain does not automatically make the beer thick or filling. You can take that dark roasted malt, use it for flavour and colour, and then ferment the whole thing with cold, clean lager yeast, producing a beer that looks like a stout but drinks like a crisp golden lager. Your eyes expect a heavy sludge. Your mouth gets a refreshing surprise. The Dunkel is the older and softer of the two. For a long time before pale malts became common, this dark brown lager was simply the everyday beer of Bavaria, the standard pour before the golden styles arrived and stole the spotlight. It tastes of toasted bread, gentle caramel, a touch of chocolate, and a nutty richness, all rounded and smooth without any harsh bitterness. It is comforting and malty without being sweet, the kind of beer that feels like a warm hug from the past, back when all beer was dark simply because nobody had figured out how to make it any other way. The Schwarzbier takes things a shade further into the dark. Its name literally means black beer, and it lives up to it, pouring a deep, opaque, near black that looks genuinely dramatic in the glass. But here is the trick that makes it so beloved. Despite that intimidating colour, it stays remarkably light on its feet, with a dry, clean, crisp finish and flavours that lean toward dark chocolate, coffee, and a faint, pleasant roastiness. It is like a stout that went to finish in school, learning to whisper its dark flavours politely instead of shouting them. You brace yourself for something rich and chewy, and instead get something you could happily drink all evening. What both of these beers share is that signature lager cleanliness, working quietly underneath all the dark drama. That cold, patient, bottom fermenting yeast strips away any heaviness and lets the roasted flavours shine without ever becoming a burden. The result is a beer that offers all the cosy, roasty, chocolatey satisfaction people crave from dark beer, minus the filling, meal in a glass weight that scares so many drinkers off. It is genuinely the best of both worlds, and it converts skeptics faster than almost any other style, once they actually take a sip instead of judging the colour. So the next time someone waves off a dark beer, convinced it will be some thick, brooding, stomach-filling ordeal, hand them a Dunkel or a Schwarzbier and watch their face do a little dance of confusion and delight. It is a wonderful reminder that appearances lie, that the scariest-looking option is sometimes the friendliest, and that the humble lager family is far more versatile than its crisp golden reputation ever let on. Dark does not mean difficult, and these two beers are the proof, glowing quietly black in the glass and asking only that you give them a chance. This is where the lager family finally runs out of road, so let's cross over to the other great branch and meet the ales, starting with the friendliest one of all. Welcome to the ale side of the family, and there is no gentler introduction than the pale ale. This is the beer that taught an entire generation that beer could taste like something on purpose. Brewed warm with those bold top fermenting yeasts, a pale ale balances a solid bready backbone with a noticeable but friendly hop flavour, often bringing hints of citrus, pine or flowers. It is more flavourful than a lager, but nowhere near as aggressive as its famous descendant. Think of it as the sensible older sibling who behaved well right before things got completely out of hand. To appreciate why the pale ale matters, remember where we just came from. Everything on the lager side prized cleanliness and restraint, with the yeast keeping quiet and letting the malt or hop speak in polite tones. The pale ale flips that entirely. Here the warm, loving ale yeast gets to be expressive, adding its own subtle fruitiness, and the hops step forward from supporting roles into something closer to co-stars. Suddenly beer stops being merely refreshing and starts being interesting, a drink with actual opinions about itself. For a lot of people, the first good pale ale is the moment beer clicks. The word pale here is a bit of a historical joke, because these beers are usually a lovely golden to amber colour, not pale at all by modern standards. The name comes from an era when most beer was dark brown or black, so anything brewed with lighter malt looked shockingly pale by comparison. It is a bit like how a very old person might call a beige car white. The label made sense against the backdrop of its time, so do not expect a colourless beer. Expect a warm golden one that simply earned its name in a much darker age. The classic English pale ale and its bottled cousin, sometimes called bitter despite not being especially bitter, leaned earthy and balanced with biscuity malt and gentle, floral, slightly herbal hops. Then the style crossed the ocean and met American hops, which is where things got loud. American pale ales embraced the bold, citrusy, piney character of homegrown hop varieties, cranking up the aroma and flavour into something brighter and juicier. The result was a beer bursting with grapefruit and pine notes, still balanced by a solid malt backbone, but with far more personality shouting from the glass. That American version essentially launched the entire craft beer movement. What makes the pale ale such a perfect gateway is its balance. It offers real, memorable hop flavour without the punishing bitterness that scares newcomers off. There's enough malt sweetness to keep everything friendly and rounded, so the hops feel like a welcome guest rather than an ambush. It is bold enough to make a lager drinker sit up and take notice, yet approachable enough that they do not immediately flee. This is the beer you hand someone who says they want to get into craft beer but is nervous about the intense stuff. It builds a bridge instead of a wall. It is also, importantly, a fantastic everyday beer for people who already love flavour. Not every occasion calls for a face-melting hop bomb or a nap-inducing dark monster. Sometimes you just want a beer with genuine character that you can still drink a couple of over dinner without your palate waving a white flag. The pale ale fills that role beautifully, pairing happily with everything from burgers to spicy food to a quiet evening of doing nothing in particular. It is the dependable, flavourful workhorse of the ale world. And oh, did things get out of hand? Because the pale ale has a wildly popular child that took hops to a truly ridiculous extreme. No beer style in the last few decades has caused more passionate arguments than the India Pale Ale, better known as the IPA. Legend says it was brewed extra strong and extra hoppy, so it could survive the long sea voyage from England to India, since hops act as a natural preservative. The result is a beer that leans hard into hop flavour and bitterness, often exploding with notes of grapefruit, pine, mango, and things that sound more like a smoothie than a beverage with alcohol in it. People either adore IPAs or complain that they taste like chewing on a Christmas tree, and both camps are weirdly proud of their opinion. Let's start with that famous origin story, because it is equal parts true and delightfully exaggerated. In the era of the British Empire, brewers needed to ship beer all the way to thirsty colonists in India, a journey of months through blistering heat that would spoil ordinary beer into vinegar. The solution was to load the beer with extra hops, nature's preservative, and brew it a bit stronger for good measure. The story goes that this hoppy, sturdy beer arrived tasting wonderful, and a legend was born. The reality is a touch messier, since strong hoppy beers already existed, but the romantic version is far too good to abandon entirely. Whatever the true history, the modern IPA is a monument to human obsession with a single flower. The entire style is built around showcasing hops in all their glory, pushing their flavour and aroma to the absolute front of the experience. Depending on the hop varieties used, you might get an explosion of grapefruit and orange, a resiny blast of pine forest, a tropical wave of mango and passion fruit, or a dank herbal funk that hop lovers describe with the same reverence others reserve for fine wine. The malt takes a back seat here, existing mainly to give the hops a stage to perform on. Then there is the bitterness, the great dividing line of the beer world. Hops do not just add aroma. Boiled long enough, they add a firm, sometimes bracing bitterness that lingers on the finish. Classic West Coast style IPAs lean into this hard, delivering a crisp, dry, aggressively bitter punch that devotees find exhilarating and skeptics find roughly as pleasant as licking a pine cone. This is the flavour people are reacting to when they either swoon or grimace. There is very little middle ground, which is exactly why the IPA generates such passionate loyalty and such theatrical complaints. The IPA is, without exaggeration, the beer that built the modern craft beer industry. When small independent breweries started popping up everywhere, the bold, hop-forward IPA became their calling card, the flag they planted to declare that beer could be intense, creative, and unafraid. It gave craft brewers a canvas to show off, endlessly tinkering with new hop varieties and techniques, and it gave adventurous drinkers something exciting to chase. Walk into almost any craft brewery today, and you'll find the menu dominated by IPAs of every possible description, because this is the style that pays the bills and stirs the passion. It is worth being honest, though. The IPA is genuinely not for everyone, and that is completely fine. If your first sip tastes like a mouthful of bitter grapefruit rind and regret, you are not wrong, and your palate is not broken. Some people love that intensity, and some people never will. And the beauty of the enormous beer family is that nobody is obligated to enjoy the loudest member. But if you do develop a taste for it, a whole universe of hoppy possibility opens up, and you will find yourself nodding along with the bearded enthusiasts you once quietly avoided. And naturally, once brewers had an IPA, they immediately asked whether they could make it even bigger. If a regular IPA was intense, the double IPA, also called an imperial IPA, took one look at it and said, "Hold my beer." This is the style where brewers cram in even more hops and even more grain, pushing both the flavour and the alcohol content up to occasionally alarming levels. The strange magic is that a well-made double IPA can hide its strength behind all that juicy, resiny hop flavour, which is exactly how people accidentally have a very memorable evening. It is bold, it is boozy, and it does not apologise for either. The logic behind the double IPA is beautifully simple and slightly reckless. If people love the hops in a regular IPA, then surely they will love even more hops, right? So brewers pile them in by the shovelful, layering hop additions throughout the brewing process to maximise every bit of flavour and aroma they can wring out. But there is a catch. All those hops bring a lot of bitterness, and to keep the beer from tasting like straight-up battery acid, brewers also have to add more malt to balance it out. More malt means more sugar means more alcohol, and suddenly your beer has crept up to a strength that demands respect. The word imperial, which you will see attached to all sorts of beers, is worth explaining here. It does not mean anything official or precise. It simply became beer shorthand for bigger, stronger, and more intense, a way of saying this is the cranked up, no restraint version of a normal style. So an imperial IPA and a double IPA are the same thing, a regular IPA with the volume knob snapped clean off. It is the beer equivalent of taking a spicy dish and asking the kitchen to make it extra spicy, then watching your dinner companions raise a concerned eyebrow. Taste a good one, and you will understand the appeal immediately. A well-crafted double IPA is a wave of concentrated hop flavour, thick with juicy citrus, tropical fruit and sticky pine resin, backed by just enough sweet malt to keep it from collapsing into pure bitterness. There is a richness and a warmth to it that a regular IPA lacks, a fuller body and a lingering intensity that coat your whole mouth. It is not a subtle experience, it is a beer that grabs you by the collar, and for hop lovers that is precisely the point. Here lies the danger, and it is a real one. That big malty body and all those bold flavours do a remarkable job of masking the alcohol, so a double IPA often tastes far less strong than it actually is. You settle in, enjoying the juicy hop goodness, and it drinks smooth and flavourful rather than harsh and boozy. The trouble is that the strength is still there, patiently waiting, and because the beer is so tasty and the alcohol so well disguised, it is dangerously easy to have one more than you should. Many a cheerful evening has taken an abrupt turn thanks to a deceptively delicious double IPA. This is fundamentally a sipping beer, whatever its drinkability might trick you into believing. It rewards slow, appreciative enjoyment rather than rapid consumption. Ideally in a smaller glass and with a clear plan not to operate any heavy machinery afterward. Treat it like the heavyweight it is, savour the enormous flavour, and pace yourself, and it becomes one of the most rewarding experiences in all of hoppy beer. Ignore its strength and it will very politely, very deliciously remind you exactly who is in charge. But not every hop lover actually wanted their beer to taste bitter, which led to one of the biggest beer crazes in recent memory. A while back, brewers in New England had a radical idea. What if an IPA kept all the tropical fruit flavour of the hops but ditched most of the harsh bitterness and looked somehow like cloudy orange juice? The result was the hazy IPA, a beer so soft, juicy and drinkable that it converted people who had sworn they hated IPAs forever. It pours murky and opaque, almost like a smoothie, and tastes of mango, peach and citrus with a pillowy soft finish. Purists grumbled that it barely looked like beer, while everyone else happily lined up to buy it by the case. The whole revolution came down to a clever bit of brewing rebellion. Traditional West Coast IPAs got their bitterness from boiling the hops for a long time, which extracts those sharp, bitter compounds. The New England brewers realised that if they added most of their hops very late in the process, or even after fermentation in a technique called dry hopping, they could capture all the glorious fruity aroma and flavour without extracting nearly as much of the harsh bitterness. It was like figuring out how to get all the perfume of a flower without any of the thorns, and drinkers absolutely lost their minds over it. That famous cloudy appearance is not a flaw or an accident. It is a badge of honour. The haze comes from a combination of the huge amounts of hops, the specific yeasts and grains used, and a deliberate refusal to filter the beer clear. The look genuinely resembles cloudy juice, opaque and glowing gold or orange, and this soft murkiness even seems to contribute to the beer's pillowy texture on the tongue. For decades, brewers chased crystal clarity as a sign of quality, so an entire style proudly celebrating cloudiness felt almost scandalous, which of course only made it more exciting to a new generation of drinkers. The flavour is where the magic really lands. A great hazy IPA tastes like someone squeezed a whole basket of tropical fruit into your glass, bursting with mango, pineapple, peach, orange and passion fruit. Yet it stays soft, smooth and easygoing. Without the aggressive bitterness of older IPAs, there is nothing to wince at, nothing to brace against. It is all the fun, fruity, aromatic joy of hops with none of the pine cone punishment. The texture often turns out lush and creamy, closer to a fruit nectar than the crisp, dry finish of a classic IPA. This is the beer that finally cracked open the world of hops for the hop skeptics. All those people who tried a bitter West Coast IPA once, made a face, and swore off IPAs for life suddenly had a version that gave them everything appealing about the style with none of the parts they disliked. The hazy IPA became a gateway drug for an entire wave of new craft beer fans, proving that you could have big, exciting hop flavour in a form that felt gentle and approachable. Its popularity exploded so fast that it now feels like it has always been here, when really it is one of the newer arrivals to the party. Of course, the beer nerds and traditionalists had opinions, as beer nerds and traditionalists always do. Some grumbled that a hazy IPA barely qualifies as a proper IPA, that the cloudiness masks flaws, or that the whole thing is a passing fad dressed up as a smoothie. Meanwhile, the rest of the world simply kept buying it by the crate, thoroughly unbothered by the debate. And that, in a way, is the perfect summary of modern beer culture. A small group arguing fiercely about authenticity, while everyone else just enjoys their delicious cloudy juice. With the hop obsession fully explored, let's swing back toward the malty, comforting side of the ale family. After all the hop drama, the amber ale feels like sinking into a familiar couch. This is a warm, balanced ale that leans on toasty caramel malt flavours while keeping just enough hops around to stay interesting. It glows a beautiful reddish copper in the glass and tends to taste of caramel, toffee, and a little toasted bread without ever demanding too much of your attention. It is the beer you order when you want flavour but do not want a lecture, the dependable middle-of-the-road choice that quietly never lets you down. The amber ale is essentially what happens when you take the pale ale and shift the spotlight from the hops back onto the malt. Instead of hops shouting citrus and pine at you, the star of the show becomes caramel malt, a specially kilned grain that brings those rich, sweet, toasty flavours we associate with comfort food. The hops are still present, keeping the beer from becoming cloying, but they play a supporting role, providing just enough balance to round everything out. The result is a beer that feels warm and generous rather than sharp and aggressive. That gorgeous colour is not just for show, though it certainly is pretty. The reddish amber glow comes directly from those caramel malts, and it is a reliable visual promise of what is inside the glass. When you see that warm copper hue catching the light, your brain correctly anticipates something toasty and a little sweet. The liquid equivalent of the colour of autumn leaves or a well-worn leather chair. It is one of the most inviting-looking beers there is, practically glowing with the suggestion of cosy flavour, and it delivers on that promise every single time. What makes the amber ale so quietly lovable is its total lack of pretension. It is not trying to blow your mind with extreme hops, and it is not trying to knock you flat with alcohol, and it is not hiding some secret you need a beard and a degree to appreciate. It simply offers a solid, satisfying, flavourful beer that tastes good and asks nothing further of you. In a beer world increasingly obsessed with being the biggest, the boldest, the rarest, and the most extreme, there is something deeply refreshing about a style that is happy just being genuinely nice. This makes it a fantastic crowd pleaser and a brilliant bridge beer. Serve amber ale to a room full of people with wildly different tastes, and you will find it satisfies almost everyone. The lager drinkers appreciate that it is smooth and not too bitter, while the flavour seekers appreciate that it actually tastes of something rich and interesting. It sits comfortably in that middle ground where most people's preferences quietly overlap, which is exactly why it makes such a reliable choice when you are buying for a group or simply cannot decide what you're in the mood for. It is also a spectacular food beer, thanks to that malty backbone. The toasty caramel flavours pair beautifully with grilled and roasted foods, because they echo the same delicious browned, caramelised notes you get from cooking meat over fire. Burgers, barbecue, roasted chicken, pizza, and hearty comfort food all sing alongside an amber ale. The beer's sweetness and the food's savoury char complementing each other perfectly. It is the sort of beer you can put on the table for a casual dinner and trust to make everything taste a little better without ever stealing the show. Nudge that maltiness a little further and lose the reddish glow, and you arrive at an Old English favourite. The brown ale is what happens when a beer decides its entire personality is going to be comforting. A traditional English style, it is nutty, malty, and smooth, with gentle flavours of caramel, toffee, and toasted bread, and just a whisper of hops loitering in the background. It is the liquid equivalent of a wool sweater and a rainy afternoon, the kind of beer that pairs perfectly with doing absolutely nothing important. It never tries to impress you, which is precisely why so many people quietly love it. Where the amber ale kept a little hop sparkle around for balance, the brown ale leans almost entirely into malt and calls it a day. This is a beer built around the warm, roasty, nutty flavours that come from slightly darker malts, without ever tipping into the coffee and chocolate territory of the truly dark beers. Think toasted bread crust, hazelnuts, gentle caramel, and a soft, rounded sweetness, all wrapped up in a smooth, easygoing body. It is beer as comfort, beer as a gentle exhale at the end of a long day, with nothing sharp or challenging anywhere in sight. The brown ale is a deeply English creation, an understanding that helps explain its whole vibe. English beer culture historically prized balance, sessionability and modest strength. Beers you could enjoy several of over a long evening of conversation in a warm pub. The brown ale fits that tradition perfectly, moderate in alcohol, rich in flavour but light on aggression, the sort of thing you settle in with rather than marvel at. There is a famous version from the north of England, often nicknamed the dog after the old excuse of popping out to walk the dog when one was really nipping to the pub. That became a beloved icon of working-class drinking. Different regions of England put their own gentle spin on the style. The southern versions tend to be a bit sweeter and darker, softer and more caramel forward. The northern versions lean drier and nuttier, with a cleaner finish and a slightly more assertive character, though assertive is a strong word for a beer this mellow. Neither version is trying to reinvent anything. They are simply two comfortable variations on the same cosy theme, like two slightly different recipes for the same beloved family stew. American craft brewers, being incapable of leaving any style alone, eventually got their hands on the brown ale and did what they do best, which is add more hops. The American brown ale keeps that lovely nutty malty core but bumps up the hop flavour and bitterness, creating a hybrid that marries English coziness with New World boldness. It is a fun twist that gives the humble brown ale a bit more of a backbone, appealing to drinkers who want the comfort of a brown ale, but with a little extra character shouting from the sidelines. Both versions have their devoted fans. What is genuinely charming about the brown ale is how unfashionable it is, and how little it cares. In an era of glittering hazy IPAs and barrel-aged monsters, the brown ale sits quietly in the corner, offering nothing but reliable, understated comfort. It will never be the trendy beer that people line up for or trade online. It is instead the beer you return to when you are tired of chasing the latest thing, the dependable old friend that has been there all along. There is a real quiet wisdom in a beer that knows exactly what it is and feels no need to be anything more. Now, if we keep roasting those grains darker and darker, the beer starts heading somewhere much moodier and far more dramatic. The porter was the first beer to fully embrace the dark side, and it did so by becoming the favourite drink of hard-working London labourers in the 1700s, which is actually how it got its name. Brewed with heavily roasted malts, it pours dark brown to black and tastes of chocolate, coffee, caramel and toasted bread, all while staying surprisingly smooth and drinkable. It was the working-class fuel of an entire era, cheap, filling and satisfying after a long day of hauling heavy things around a filthy city. The origin of the porter is a genuinely lovely slice of history. In the bustling, grimy London of the 1700s, the streets were full of porters, the men who hauled goods, luggage and cargo through the city all day long, breaking their backs for a living. These workers needed a beer that was cheap, dark, hearty, and filling enough to feel like sustenance after brutal labour. A dark, roasty, robust style rose to meet that demand and became so beloved by these workers that it simply took their name. It is a rare beer that is literally named after the exhausted people who drank it. The porter marked a real turning point in brewing, because it was one of the first beers made specifically to showcase dark roasted malt as the main event rather than an accident. Roasting the grain harder unlocked deep flavours of chocolate, coffee, caramel and toast, giving the beer a richness that paler styles simply could not match. Crucially, because it was an ale fermented warm, it also carried a fuller body and a rounder character than a dark lager, making it feel genuinely nourishing. For working people spending long hours in cold, hard conditions, a pint of porter was as close to a warm meal as a beer could get. It was also, for its time, something of a triumph of mass production. The porter became so wildly popular that London brewers began making it on an enormous scale, building some of the first truly industrial breweries to keep up with demand. Giant vats of the stuff aged in cavernous warehouses, and the style helped transform brewing from a small local craft into a booming big business. One infamous incident even saw a massive vat of porter burst, flooding a London neighbourhood with a wave of dark beer, which is surely one of the more unusual ways to make history. The flavour of a good porter remains a beautiful thing today, a kind of middle ground in the dark beer world. It gives you those rich, roasty notes of chocolate and coffee without going quite as heavy or intense as its more famous descendant. There is a smoothness to it, a drinkable balance, that makes it feel indulgent without being overwhelming. It is the sort of dark beer you can actually have a couple of, warm and satisfying without sitting in your stomach like a brick. It bridges the gap perfectly between the everyday drinkability of lighter beers and the rich decadence of the truly dark stuff. For a long stretch, the porter faded from fashion, overshadowed and nearly forgotten, but the craft beer revival brought it roaring back. Modern brewers rediscovered its versatility and charm, and today you can find porters flavoured with everything from vanilla to coffee to smoked malt, all built on that same reliable roasty foundation. It turns out this old working-class fuel had plenty of life left in it, and a new generation of drinkers happily embraced the beer that once powered the labourers of London through their long, back-breaking days. It also happens to be the direct ancestor of one of the most famous beers on the planet, which we are about to meet. If you have ever seen someone order a beer that looks like a pint of liquid velvet topped with a creamy tan foam, you have met the stout. Originally a stronger, bolder version of the porter, so much so that it was first called a stout porter, this beer eventually became a legend in its own right. It is famously dark, roasty and smooth, with big flavours of coffee and dark chocolate, and a texture that feels almost like a small meal. The most famous example is so iconic that people who know nothing about beer can still picture the exact glass. The stout began life as nothing more than a beefed-up porter, which is exactly what the name tells you if you know the old meaning of the word. Back in the day, stout simply meant strong or sturdy, so a stout porter was just a stronger version of the popular dark beer. Brewers made these bigger, bolder porters for drinkers who wanted more of everything. More roast, more body, more richness, more strength. Over time, the porter part of the name got dropped. The beer took on its own identity, and the stout stepped out of its parent's shadow to become arguably the most iconic dark beer in the world. The defining flavour of a stout comes from heavily roasted barley, taken even further than in a porter. This deep roasting produces intense flavours of dark chocolate, espresso, and a pleasant roasty bitterness, almost like a cold coffee that happens to contain alcohol. But the real star of a great stout is often its texture. A well-made stout can feel astonishingly smooth and creamy, coating your mouth like liquid silk, which is why so many people describe drinking one as more like enjoying a dessert or a light meal than sipping a beer. It is rich, satisfying, and comforting in a way few other drinks manage. That famous creamy texture, especially in the most iconic Irish version, comes from a clever trick. Instead of being carbonated purely with carbon dioxide, that beer is served using a mix that includes nitrogen gas, which produces much smaller, softer bubbles. The result is that thick, velvety, cascading foam that settles into a dense, creamy head, and a mouthfeel so smooth it feels almost like drinking a milkshake made of coffee and roasted grain. Watching that beer settle in the glass the tiny bubbles tumbling downward before the pale head forms on top, has become one of the most recognizable rituals in all of beer. Here is the fact that surprises almost everyone, and it is worth savouring. Despite looking thick, black, and intimidating, the most famous stout in the world is actually quite light and low in alcohol, gentler than many a pale golden lager. The dark colour and rich roasty flavour trick your brain into expecting something heavy and boozy, but a classic dry Irish stout is remarkably easy drinking, a beer you can genuinely enjoy several of over a relaxed evening. It is the ultimate proof that you truly cannot judge a beer by its colour, a lesson the dark lagers already tried to teach us, and that the stout hammers home. The stout has since branched out into a whole delicious family, which we will meet in a moment. But even the classic version deserves its legendary status. It is a beer that manages to be both a humble everyday pint in countless pubs and a genuine cultural icon recognised around the globe. It has become shorthand for a certain kind of cosy, convivial atmosphere, the beer of warm pubs, good conversation, and unhurried evenings. Few beers carry that much meaning in a single glass, and fewer still earn it while remaining so genuinely pleasant to drink. And like every popular style tonight, the stout has a whole family of variations, starting with the strongest of them all. When brewers wanted to create a stout fit for royalty, quite literally for the Russian imperial court, they cranked everything up and produced the imperial stout, the biggest, boldest, darkest beer in the whole lineup. This is a thick, intense, high alcohol monster that tastes of espresso, dark chocolate, dark fruit, and sometimes a warming boozy kick that sneaks up on you when you least expect it. It is the beer you sip from a small glass, slowly, ideally while contemplating your life choices in a very comfortable chair. The origin story here is a proper piece of royal history. Back in the 1700s, English brewers wanted to export their dark beer all the way to the imperial court of Russia, which was a very long and very cold journey. Much like the IPA sailing to India, the beer needed to be strong enough to survive the trip, so brewers brewed it enormous, packing in huge amounts of malt to boost both the flavour and the alcohol. The Russian court, and reportedly the Empress herself, absolutely adored it, and the style earned its grand imperial name from those royal admirers. A beer literally fit for an empress is a solid marketing pitch. That word imperial, which we met back with the double IPA, does the same job here that it does everywhere in beer. It signals the biggest, strongest, most intense version of a style, and the imperial stout takes that mandate extremely seriously. Where a regular stout might be gentle and easy drinking, the imperial stout is anything but. It is a towering, powerful beer, often twice as strong or more, with a thick, viscous body that coats the glass in a flavour so concentrated it borders on overwhelming. This is not a beer that whispers. This is a beer that fills the entire room with its presence. The flavour is a rich, brooding symphony of darkness. Imagine the deepest espresso, bitter dark chocolate, dried fruit like figs and raisins, molasses, and sometimes a warming note of alcohol that spreads through your chest like a small fire. It is intense, layered, and complex, the kind of beer that reveals new flavours as it warms in the glass and as you sip it slowly over a long stretch of time. Rushing an imperial stout would be like gulping fine espresso. Possible, but a tragic waste of something built for slow appreciation. This is also the beer world's favourite playground for the barrel-aging craze, and the results can be spectacular. Because the imperial stout is already so big, rich and strong, it holds up beautifully to being aged in old whiskey, bourbon or wine barrels, soaking up flavours of oak, vanilla and spirit over months of patient rest. These barrel-aged versions have become some of the most sought-after and celebrated beers in the entire world, hunted by enthusiasts, traded like treasure, and sipped with the reverence usually reserved for fine liquor. A single bottle can become a genuine event. Make no mistake, this is a beer that demands respect and a little caution. Its strength is serious, its flavours are enormous, and it is absolutely not built for casual chugging on a hot afternoon. This is a slow, contemplative, cold, weather sort of beer, best enjoyed from a small glass in a comfortable chair with plenty of time to appreciate every complex sip. It is the grand finale of the Stout family, a beer that started as a drink for an empress and became a benchmark for how big, bold and magnificent a dark beer can possibly be. But not every stout wants to knock you over, and some are downright gentle. For every heavyweight imperial stout there is a softer cousin designed purely for smoothness and comfort. The milk stout gets its silky sweetness from lactose, a sugar from milk that the yeast cannot eat, leaving behind a gentle creamy sweetness, which is why it is sometimes called a sweet stout. The oatmeal stout, meanwhile, adds oats to the brew for an incredibly smooth, almost velvety texture that coats your mouth like a warm blanket. Both take the roasty coffee and chocolate flavours of a stout and wrap them in something cosy and rounded. Let's start with the milk stout because the name confuses people and the truth is delightful. There is no actual milk poured into your beer, so anyone squeamish can relax. Instead, brewers add lactose, which is the natural sugar found in milk. The clever part is that beer yeast simply cannot digest lactose the way it digests normal grain sugars, so instead of being turned into alcohol, the lactose stays behind in the finished beer, adding a soft, gentle, creamy sweetness. It is a bit like sweetening your coffee with a sugar the yeast is physically incapable of eating, a loophole that gives the beer its rounded, dessert-like character. That gentle sweetness transforms the whole experience of drinking a stout. Where a classic dry Irish stout finishes crisp and roasty, a milk stout finishes soft, smooth, and lightly sweet, taming the bitterness of the roasted grain into something far more indulgent. The flavours of chocolate and coffee are still there, but now they taste more like a mocha or a chocolate dessert than a black cup of espresso. It is the beer equivalent of adding cream and sugar to your coffee, turning something bracing and bold into something comforting and easy to love. The oatmeal stout achieves its own kind of magic through a completely different trick, one borrowed from the breakfast table. By adding a portion of oats to the grain, brewers give the beer an extraordinarily smooth, silky, almost slippery texture. Anyone who has eaten a bowl of porridge knows how oats bring that soft, rounded, creamy quality to whatever they touch, and they do exactly the same thing to beer. The result is a stout that feels velvety and luxurious on the tongue, gliding across your palate with a fullness and smoothness that plain barley simply cannot achieve on its own. The flavours in an oatmeal stout tend to be a touch more restrained and balanced than in a milk stout, less about sweetness and more about that gorgeous texture. You get the familiar roasty notes of coffee and dark chocolate, but softened and rounded, carried along by that silky body into a smooth, satisfying finish. It is comforting in a slightly more grown-up way than the sweeter milk stout, the sort of beer that feels like a warm, cosy hug without being cloying. Both styles share the same goal of gentle indulgence. They simply take different paths to get there. What both of these beers prove so beautifully is that dark and strong are not the same thing, a lesson this whole dark section keeps circling back to. Neither the milk stout nor the oatmeal stout is particularly high in alcohol, and neither is trying to overwhelm you. They are moderate, approachable, and endlessly comforting, offering all the rich roasty pleasure of a stout in a package that feels soft rather than intense. They are perfect for someone who loves the idea of a dark beer but wants something smooth and gentle rather than a punishing heavyweight. Genuinely, these are dessert in a glass, and there is no shame whatsoever in treating them that way. A milk stout alongside a slice of chocolate cake or an oatmeal stout on a cold evening in place of pudding is one of life's quiet, cosy pleasures. They are the beers you reach for when you want comfort rather than adventure, warmth rather than a thrill, and on the right night that is exactly the right thing to want. Now let's leave the dark beers behind entirely and head somewhere pale, cloudy, and full of bread. Meet the hefeweizen, a German wheat beer so cloudy it looks like someone forgot to filter it, which is exactly the point. Brewed with a large portion of wheat instead of just barley, and served proudly unfiltered, it pours a hazy pale gold and delivers one of the strangest and most delightful surprises in all of beer. It genuinely tastes of banana and clove, all produced naturally by the special yeast. No fruit is added, no spices dumped in. The yeast simply decides to taste like a spice cabinet all on its own. It is light, refreshing, and a favourite on hot summer days, usually served in a tall curvy glass. The name itself gives away the recipe, if you can wrestle with the German for a moment. Hefe means yeast, and Weizen means wheat. So a hefeweizen is quite literally a yeast wheat beer, and both of those words are doing important work. The wheat, used alongside the usual barley, gives the beer a soft, bready, slightly fluffy character, and a pale, hazy appearance. The yeast, left proudly in the beer rather than filtered out, is responsible for both the cloudiness and, more importantly, that famous flavour. It is a beer named honestly after the two ingredients that make it weird and wonderful. That banana and clove flavour deserves a proper moment of appreciation because it genuinely baffles first-time drinkers. People take a sip, taste ripe banana and a warm spicy clove note, and immediately assume the brewer must have thrown in some fruit and spice. But no, it is all the yeast. This particular strain of wheat beer yeast, when fermented at the right temperature, naturally produces compounds that taste startlingly like banana and clove entirely on its own. It is one of the great magic tricks of brewing, a beer that tastes of a fruit salad and a spice rack without containing a single scrap of either. The texture is the other half of the charm, and it comes straight from all that wheat. A good hefeweizen has a soft, pillowy, almost fluffy body that feels gentle and full without being heavy, capped by a thick, generous, long-lasting foam. That fluffy head is a point of pride, and it is why the beer is traditionally served in a tall, curvy, vase-shaped glass designed specifically to show off both the hazy golden body and the towering white crown of foam on top. It is one of the most visually appealing beers there is, practically glowing in the right light. There is even a proper ritual to serving one, at least if you want to do it the traditional way. Because so much of the flavour lives in the yeast that settles at the bottom of the bottle, the classic method involves pouring most of the beer, then gently rousing and swirling the last bit of yeasty sediment before adding it back in, ensuring you get the full, cloudy, flavourful experience. Some people even debate the correct technique with the intensity others reserve for far more serious matters. It is a small, charming ceremony for a beer that rewards a little care. Above all, the hefeweizen is a summer beer, and few styles suit a hot afternoon better. It is light, refreshing, and thirst-quenching, with just enough flavour to keep things interesting, and a low enough strength to enjoy several without regret. In the beer gardens of southern Germany, it flows freely all summer long, the perfect companion to sunshine, pretzels, and lazy conversation. Some drinkers even add a slice of lemon, though purists will glare at you for tampering with the natural banana and clove balance. Either way, it is a bright, cloudy, faintly absurd little miracle of the beer. Germany was not the only place obsessed with wheat, though, because Belgium had its own cloudy creation. While Germany was busy perfecting its banana-flavoured wheat beer, Belgium wandered off in a completely different direction with the wit beer, which simply means white beer. This one is brewed with wheat as well, but the Belgians toss in coriander and dried orange peel, giving it a bright, zesty, slightly spicy character that tastes like a sunny afternoon in a glass. It pours pale and cloudy, drinks light and refreshing, and is often served with a slice of orange perched on the rim. It is the beer that makes people who loudly claim to hate beer suddenly reconsider their entire stance. The key difference between the Belgian wit beer and the German hefeweizen comes down to a single decision, whether to add spices or not. The German version relies entirely on its yeast to produce flavour, keeping the recipe rigidly simple. The Belgians, being Belgians, decided that was far too restrained and started adding actual ingredients to the pot. The traditional additions are coriander seed and the dried peel of a bitter orange, and these transform the beer into something bright, citrusy, and lightly spiced, a completely different creature from its German cousin despite sharing that wheaty, cloudy foundation. Those added flavours work together beautifully to create something that tastes almost like sunshine. The orange peel brings a bright, zesty citrus note, while the coriander adds a soft, lemony, faintly peppery spice that lifts the whole thing. Underneath it all sits the gentle, bready softness of the wheat and a light tartness that keeps everything fresh and lively. The result is delicate, refreshing, and endlessly easy to drink, a beer that feels less like a heavy indulgence and more like a light, aromatic refresher on a warm day. It practically begs to be enjoyed outdoors. The wit beer has a genuinely dramatic history, which makes its current popularity even sweeter. This centuries-old Belgian style very nearly went extinct entirely, fading into obscurity until the last traditional brewery making it closed its doors decades ago. The style was essentially dead. Then a determined Belgian man, unwilling to let it vanish, revived the recipe and began brewing it again, almost single-handedly bringing the whole style back from the grave. That revival was so successful that the wit beer is now one of the most popular wheat beers in the world, a remarkable comeback for a beer that was very nearly lost forever. That famous orange slice on the rim is a point of gentle controversy, which is very on brand for beer culture. The garnish became strongly associated with the style, especially as it spread internationally, and many people expect it. Purists argue that a well-made wit beer already has plenty of orange character from the peel used in brewing and needs no help. Others enjoy the extra citrus lift and the pretty presentation. It is a small, friendly debate, and the honest answer is that it hardly matters. Whether garnished or not, the beer inside remains a bright, refreshing delight. The real magic of the wit beer is its extraordinary ability to convert beer skeptics. Hand a wit beer to someone who insists they hate beer, who finds most of it too bitter or too heavy or too intense, and watch what happens. The soft wheat, the bright citrus, the gentle spice, and the light, refreshing body add up to something so approachable and pleasant that it sidesteps every complaint. Time and again, it is the beer that makes a lifelong beer avoider pause take a second sip and admit that maybe, just maybe, they had been missing something all along. From cloudy and refreshing, let's shift to a beer that quietly bridges the gap between ale and lager. The Kölsch is a bit of a rebel, because it cheerfully breaks the tidy rule we set up earlier about ales and lagers. Brewed in the German city of Cologne, it uses warm, loving ale yeast but is then aged cold like a lager, giving it the best of both worlds. The delicate fruitiness of an ale with the crisp, clean finish of a lager. The result is a pale, light, elegant beer that is almost dangerously easy to drink. In its home city, it is traditionally served in small, skinny glasses, and eager waiters will keep swapping your empty for a full one until you place a coaster on top to formally surrender. Remember that great divide we established near the beginning? The clean fork in the road between warm, fast ales and cold, slow lagers? The Kölsch politely ignores it. It is brewed using ale yeast, which ferments warm and adds a touch of that fruity ale character, but then it is stored cold for an extended period, a process borrowed straight from the lager playbook. This hybrid approach, warm fermentation followed by cold conditioning, produces a beer that genuinely sits in between the two great families, sharing traits with both while belonging fully to neither. It is beer refusing to be put in a box. The flavour is a masterclass in subtlety and balance. A good Kölsch is pale, light and crisp, with a delicate fruity note from the ale yeast, a soft bready malt character, and a gentle, refreshing hop bitterness on the finish. Nothing about it is loud or aggressive. It is elegant and understated, the sort of beer that reveals its quality through cleanliness and refinement rather than bold flavour. It looks almost like a pilsner and shares that crisp, refreshing quality, but there is a soft roundness and a faint fruitiness that gives it away as something a little different, a little more nuanced. The city of Cologne guards this beer with a fierce and slightly hilarious pride. Kölsch is a protected style, which means that by law, a beer can only be called a true Kölsch if it is brewed in or around Cologne, according to strict traditional rules. The local brewers take this seriously, treating their beer as a point of civic identity worth defending. It is one of the more charming examples of a city becoming so attached to its local brew that it wrapped it in legal protection, as if the beer itself were a monument worth preserving. The serving tradition is where the real fun lies, and it is a genuine spectacle. In Cologne, Kölsch is served in a distinctive small, thin, straight glass, holding only a modest amount, ensuring every pour stays fresh and cold. The waiters, known by a special local name, carry these glasses around in special round trays and operate on a wonderfully aggressive system. The moment your glass is empty, they swap it for a full one without even asking, keeping a tally of how many you have drunk with little pencil marks on your coaster. You do not order another. Another simply arrives. This leads to the one crucial piece of survival knowledge for anyone drinking in Cologne. The only way to stop the endless parade of fresh beers is to place your coaster on top of your empty glass, the universal signal that you have finally had enough. Fail to learn this, and you may find yourself drinking Kölsch well past any sensible limit, the little pencil marks multiplying while a cheerful waiter keeps the fresh glasses coming. It is a delightful, dangerous system built entirely around the fact that this beer is simply too easy and too pleasant to stop drinking on your own. Now let's head to the countryside for a beer born on the farm. Long ago on the farms of French-speaking Belgium, workers were given a refreshing low-strength ale to drink through the long summer harvest, and that beer became known as the Saison, which means season. Today the Saison has grown up into something far more complex and characterful. A pale, fizzy, slightly fruity and peppery ale with a dry finish and a wonderfully rustic personality. It is a bit unpredictable and free-spirited, which is part of its charm since no two farmhouse versions ever tasted exactly alike. It is the beer that feels like a barefoot afternoon in the countryside minus the actual chores. The story of the Saison begins with genuine practicality, much like the Märzen and its summer scheduling problem. On the farms of Wallonia, the French-speaking region of Belgium, farmers brewed beer in the cooler months to be drunk by their seasonal workers, the men hired to help bring in the harvest during the hot, exhausting days of summer. This beer needed to be refreshing enough to quench a hard-working thirst, but low enough in alcohol that the workers could drink it all day without falling face-first into the crops. It was, essentially, a thirst-quenching wage, beer as both refreshment and reward. Because these were rustic farmhouse brews made with whatever was on hand, and fermented with whatever local yeast happened to be around, the original Saisons were wildly inconsistent, and that unpredictability became part of the style's soul. There was never one single fixed recipe. Every farm made its own version, shaped by its own ingredients, its own yeast, and its own traditions. This gives the modern Saison a wonderfully free-spirited, anything-goes character. Even today, brewers treat it as a canvas for creativity, and you can find enormous variety from one Saison to the next, all still recognizably part of the same rustic family. The classic flavour profile, though, has some lovely defining features. A good Saison tends to be pale and highly carbonated, fizzy and lively in the glass, with a dry, crisp finish that keeps it refreshing. The special Saison yeast contributes a distinctive character, often fruity, spicy and peppery, sometimes with a faint earthy or funky edge that hints at its rustic origins. It is complex and layered without being heavy, delivering a lot of intriguing flavour in a body that stays light and drinkable. There is a liveliness to it, an energy, that makes it feel almost effervescent with personality. Despite its humble farmhouse roots, the modern Saison has become something of a darling among craft beer enthusiasts and brewers, precisely because of that creative freedom. Its loose, flexible identity gives brewers permission to experiment, adding different spices, using wild yeasts, aging it in barrels, or brewing it stronger and richer than the original workers ever would have recognized. It has evolved from a simple field beer into a sophisticated, characterful style, celebrated for its complexity, all while keeping that rustic, free-spirited heart. It is a beer that honours its past while cheerfully doing whatever it likes. What makes the Saison so genuinely lovable is that spirit of the countryside it carries in every sip. There is something wonderfully unpretentious yet complex about it. A beer born from hard labour and simple farm life that grew into something elegant without ever losing its rustic charm. Drinking a good Saison feels like a warm, breezy afternoon in the fields, all bright fizz and gentle spice and easygoing pleasure. It is proof that some of the most delightful things come from humble, practical beginnings, brewed not to impress anyone but simply to quench the thirst of tired workers under a summer sun. Belgium was clearly a beer wonderland, and its monks were about to prove it with some seriously strong creations. Belgian monks, much like their German counterparts, took brewing extremely seriously, and they gave the world two legendary styles, the double and the triple. The double is a rich, dark brown ale full of raisin, plum and caramel flavours, deceptively smooth for its considerable strength. The triple, confusingly, is usually pale gold rather than darker, yet it is even stronger, with a spicy, fruity, slightly sweet character that hides a serious punch behind its innocent, bright appearance. These beers were brewed in monasteries by monks who apparently believed the road to heaven ran directly through a very good glass of ale. We met brewing monks earlier in the lager section, but the Belgian monks operated in their own separate and equally impressive tradition. Certain monasteries, particularly those following a strict monastic order, brewed beer both to sustain themselves and to sell in order to fund their abbeys and their charitable works. The beers they created became so respected that a small handful of genuine monastery brewed beers earned a special protected designation, marking them as authentic products still made under the control of the monks themselves. These are among the most revered beers on the planet, brewed in quiet abbeys by men who take their craft as seriously as their prayers. The double is the darker and more brooding of the pair. It pours a deep reddish brown and delivers rich, warming flavours of dark dried fruit like raisins and plums, along with caramel, a touch of dark bread, and a subtle spicy note from the distinctive Belgian yeast. Despite this richness, it drinks with a surprising smoothness, the strength tucked politely away behind all that fruity malt. It is a beer of quiet complexity, layered and satisfying, the sort of thing you sip slowly while it gradually reveals more of itself. There is a gentle, almost meditative quality to a good double, fitting for its monastic origins. The triple plays a wonderful trick on the unsuspecting drinker. You would reasonably expect a beer called triple to be even darker and heavier than the double, but instead it is usually pale gold, bright and innocent looking in the glass. This appearance is a beautiful deception because the triple is actually the stronger of the two, often deceptively so. Behind that light golden colour lies a complex beer full of spicy, fruity, slightly sweet flavours, with notes of pear, citrus and pepper, all carried on a deceptively smooth body that hides a serious amount of alcohol. It looks like a gentle golden ale, and drinks like one, right up until it does not. The naming here follows a rough logic, even if it is not perfectly precise. In simple terms, these names reflect increasing strength, with the double being strong and the triple being stronger still, a loose ladder of intensity within the monastery tradition. The exact origins of the terms are debated, tied up in old brewing customs and the practices of specific abbeys, but for the drinker, the practical takeaway is clear enough. As you climb from double to triple, you're climbing in strength and complexity, moving deeper into the rich, rewarding world of strong Belgian ale. What unites both of these beers is that unmistakable Belgian character, driven above all by the yeast. Belgian brewing yeasts are famous for producing those distinctive fruity and spicy flavours, the notes of dark fruit, pepper, clove and orchard fruit that make these beers so recognizable and so beloved. Combined with a monastic tradition of care, patience and quiet dedication, these yeasts create beers of genuine depth and soul. To drink a proper double or triple is to taste centuries of monastery brewing wisdom, distilled into a glass by people who treated making great beer as something close to a sacred duty. And if a double and triple were strong, there was of course a final, mightier step waiting. At the very top of the Belgian strength ladder sits the quadruple, often just called a quad, the biggest and boldest of the monastery ales. Deep, dark and remarkably strong, it overflows with flavours of dark fruit, fig, caramel and warming spice, tasting almost like a Christmas cake that quietly learned how to get you tipsy. These beers are meant to be sipped slowly and respectfully, ideally not on a work night, because they carry the kind of strength that politely does not announce itself until the moment you try to stand up. If the double was strong and the triple was stronger, the quadrupel is the natural, slightly alarming final step at the top of that ladder. It is the biggest of the traditional Belgian Abbey-style ales, brewed with enormous amounts of malt to produce a beer of towering strength and richness. Deep brown to nearly black in colour, it is a dense, complex, powerful beer that represents the absolute pinnacle of the monastery brewing tradition. This is not a beer for a casual thirst. This is a beer for a special occasion, a quiet evening of contemplation, or a cold night that calls for something with real warmth and gravity. The flavour of a great quadrupel is a rich layered feast. Imagine deep dark fruit like figs, dates, raisins and plums, wrapped in caramel, toffee and dark bread, with warming notes of spice and a gentle sweetness that never quite tips into cloying. It genuinely does resemble a rich Christmas fruitcake in liquid form, dense and festive and indulgent. As it warms in the glass, even more flavours emerge, revealing new layers of complexity with every sip. It is a beer that demands and rewards slow, patient attention, unfolding gradually rather than showing everything at once. Alongside the quadrupel sits a broader family known simply as Belgian strong ales, which come in both pale and dark varieties. The Belgian strong dark ale shares much of the quadrupel's rich, fruity, warming character. The Belgian strong pale ale, meanwhile, pulls the same trick as the triple, hiding serious strength behind a deceptively light golden appearance and a spicy, fruity, dangerously drinkable character. These beers all share that hallmark Belgian yeast complexity and that sneaky tendency to be far stronger than they taste, making them some of the most treacherous and rewarding beers in the world. The great danger of all these strong Belgian ales is precisely how well they hide their power. The best examples are so smooth, so rich, and so beautifully balanced that the alcohol is almost undetectable in the flavour. There is no harsh, boozy bite to warn you, just wave after wave of delicious dark fruit and warming malt. This is exactly what makes them so hazardous in the hands of the unwary. You sip happily, lulled by how pleasant and drinkable it all is, and only later discover that the beer was far stronger than your casual pace suggested. Respect is the watchword. Wonderfully, these are among the few beers that genuinely reward aging, like fine wine tucked away in a cellar. Because they are so strong and so rich, high-quality Belgian strong ales can be stored for years, even decades, slowly mellowing and developing deeper, more complex flavours over time. Enthusiasts lay down bottles to open on future special occasions, and a well-aged quad can be a truly extraordinary experience. It is a fitting quality for beers born in monasteries, brewed by people who measured time in seasons and centuries, patient enough to let something great become even greater. But not all strong Belgian beers are sweet and warming, because some went in a shockingly sour direction. Here is where beer gets genuinely strange and wonderful. Most beers are brewed with carefully chosen yeast, but the lambic, a traditional Belgian style, is made by leaving the brew exposed to the wild yeasts and bacteria floating in the open air, which is exactly as risky as it sounds. The result is a tart, funky, sour beer, unlike anything else, sometimes aged for years and often blended or fermented with real fruit like cherries or raspberries. Modern brewers have embraced this sourness on purpose, creating a whole world of sour beers that taste bright, tangy and refreshing, sitting closer to lemonade than to your uncle's lager. To appreciate how radical the lambic is, remember everything we have learned about yeast so far. In normal brewing, yeast is the hero, carefully selected and cultivated so the brewer knows exactly what flavours to expect. The lambic throws all that control out the window. Instead of adding a chosen yeast, brewers of this ancient style leave their beer open to the air in shallow vessels, allowing the wild yeasts and bacteria naturally floating around a particular valley in Belgium to drift in and ferment it. It is a genuine act of faith, trusting the local microbes to do their unpredictable work, and it produces flavours no cultivated yeast ever could. Those wild microbes create a flavour profile that is genuinely unlike any other beer on earth. Lambics are tart and sour, with a distinctive funky, earthy, sometimes barnyard-like character that devotees find utterly fascinating and newcomers find, well, surprising. It is a complex, challenging, acquired taste, more reminiscent of a dry sour wine or a tangy cider than a conventional beer. There's nothing sweet or comforting about a traditional lambic. It is bracing, wild and alive, a beer that tastes of time, air, and the specific corner of the world where it was born. The traditional lambic process involves patience measured in years, not weeks. The beer is aged for long stretches in wooden barrels, slowly souring and developing its complex character as the wild microbes do their work. Some of the most celebrated versions involve blending young and old lambics together to create a balanced, sparkling result, a craft that takes real skill and deep experience. Others involve steeping whole fruit, traditionally sour cherries or raspberries, in the aging beer, letting it ferment further and take on a gorgeous fruity tartness. These fruited lambics are stunning, sharp and refreshing with a deep layered complexity. Out of this ancient tradition grew the modern sour beer movement, which took the idea of deliberately tart beer and ran with it enthusiastically. Contemporary brewers found ways to sour their beers more quickly and reliably, using specific bacteria to create bright, tangy, refreshing beers without necessarily waiting years or relying purely on wild air. These modern sours come in every imaginable form, often bursting with fruit, and they have won over a huge audience of drinkers who love their zippy, mouth-watering tartness. They are crisp, lively, and wonderfully thirst-quenching, the very opposite of a heavy dark beer. The most delightful thing about sour beers is how effectively they surprise people who think they know what beer is. Hand a bright, fruity, tangy sour to someone convinced that all beer is bitter or heavy, and watch their expectations shatter. These beers taste closer to a tart lemonade, a fruity spritzer, or a dry sparkling wine than to anything most people picture when they hear the word beer. They are proof of just how astonishingly broad the beer family really is, stretching all the way from crisp golden lagers to funky wild sours that would not look out of place at a wine tasting. And within this tart universe live a couple of especially quirky styles. Two of the oddest members of the sour beer family deserve their own moment in the spotlight: the Gose and the Berliner Weisse. The Gose is a German wheat beer that is, believe it or not, brewed with actual salt and coriander, giving it a strange but oddly addictive, salty and tart flavour that sounds terrible on paper and somehow works beautifully in the glass. The Berliner Weisse is a low-strength, intensely sour wheat beer, so mouth-puckering that Germans traditionally soften it with a splash of colourful fruit syrup. Both are light, refreshing, and completely unlike what most people expect beer to be. Let's start with the Gose, because the idea of a salty beer stops most people in their tracks. This old German wheat beer really does include a dose of salt in the recipe, along with coriander, a combination that sounds like a culinary dare rather than a beloved tradition. Yet the result is genuinely delicious in a way that defies logic. The gentle saltiness balances the tartness, adds a savoury roundness, and makes the beer astonishingly refreshing. the way a pinch of salt can make food taste more vibrant. It is tangy, slightly savoury, and weirdly Moorish, the kind of beer you approach with suspicion and finish with delighted confusion. The Gose has a survival story worth telling, because like the wit beer, it very nearly disappeared entirely. This regional German specialty faded almost into extinction over the years, kept alive by only a tiny handful of dedicated holdouts before the modern craft beer boom rediscovered it. Brewers hunting for interesting old styles to revive seized on the Gose with enthusiasm, and today it has enjoyed a remarkable comeback, often brewed with added fruit to complement its salty tang. It is another example of a strange, wonderful old style rescued from the brink by a new generation hungry for variety. The Berliner Weisse comes at sourness from a different, sharper angle. This is a low-alcohol wheat beer famous above all for its intense, mouth-puckering tartness, a bright, lemony sourness so pronounced that it genuinely makes your cheeks clench on the first sip. It is extremely light, fizzy, and refreshing. Practically the definition of a thirst quencher, but that aggressive sourness can be a lot to handle on its own. It was once so popular and iconic in its home city that a famous visitor supposedly nicknamed it the Champagne of the North, a nod to its sparkling, lively, sophisticated character. This is where the colourful tradition comes in, and it is one of the most charming rituals in beer. To tame that fierce sourness, Germans traditionally serve the Berliner Weisse with a shot of sweet fruit syrup stirred in, usually bright green woodruff or vivid red raspberry. The syrup mellows the tartness into something sweet, fruity, and easy drinking, and it turns the beer a startling, almost cartoonish colour in the process. Ordering one and choosing your syrup is part of the fun, resulting in a glass of neon green or hot pink beer that looks more like a novelty drink than a centuries-old tradition. What both of these strange little beers share is a wonderful willingness to defy every expectation of what beer should be. Salty, intensely sour, sometimes bright green, low in strength, and utterly refreshing. They sit about as far from a standard pint as it is possible to get while still being beer. They're playful, surprising, and endlessly interesting. The sort of beers that spark conversation and challenge assumptions. In a beer world that sometimes takes itself far too seriously, the Gose and the Berliner Weisse are a delightful reminder that beer can also just be strange, fun, and gloriously weird. From the sour and salty, let's climb to the opposite extreme, to a beer that is basically a warm hug in liquid form. Do not let the name fool you, because a barley wine is not wine at all, it is a beer. Just an incredibly strong and rich one that rivals wine in alcohol content, which is exactly how it earned its slightly misleading name. This is a big, sweet, complex ale bursting with flavours of caramel, toffee, dark fruit and bread crust, with a warming strength that makes it perfect for slowly sipping on a cold winter night. Like a fine wine, it can be aged for years, growing smoother and more complex with time. It is less a casual drink and more of a special occasion poured into a glass. The name barley wine is a wonderful little piece of English boastfulness, and it makes perfect sense once you understand it. It is called that because it is made from barley, like all beer, but reaches the kind of strength usually associated with wine. English brewers wanted a beer that could stand proudly alongside the finest wines, something strong, complex, and worthy of slow appreciation rather than casual gulping. So they brewed the biggest, richest ale they could manage and gave it a name that made its ambitions perfectly clear. It is beer with the strength and the pretensions of wine, and it wears both with pride. The flavour of a proper barley wine is an enormous, rich experience, one of the most intense in the entire ale world. Expect a huge wave of malt sweetness, layered with caramel, toffee, dark-dried fruit, toasted bread crust, and sometimes a boozy warmth that spreads pleasantly through your chest. It is thick, chewy, and deeply satisfying. A beer that fills the mouth completely and lingers long after you swallow. There is nothing light or refreshing about it. This is a beer of substance and weight, built to be savoured in small measures rather than knocked back in careless quantities. There is an interesting split within the style, an ocean apart in more ways than one. The traditional English barley wine leans toward rich malt sweetness, with those deep caramel and dried fruit flavours taking centre stage and the hops staying quietly in the background. The American version, true to form, cranks up the hops considerably, adding a big, bitter, citrusy, piney character to balance all that malt sweetness. The result is a bolder, more aggressive barley wine that pits enormous malt against enormous hops in a hefty, high-stakes tug-of-war. Both are magnificent. They simply reflect the tastes of their homelands. One of the most rewarding things about a barley wine is its remarkable ability to age, a quality it shares with the strongest Belgian ales and fine wine itself. Because it is so strong and so rich, a barley wine can be cellared for years, and it genuinely improves with time. As it ages, the harsher edges soften, the flavours meld and deepen, and complex new notes of sherry, dark fruit, and gentle oxidation emerge. Enthusiasts love to buy several bottles of the same barley wine and open one each year, tracking how it transforms and matures. It turns a single beer into a slow, unfolding experience across seasons. This is, above all, a slow beer for cold nights and quiet moments. Nobody sensibly drinks a barley wine to quench a summer thirst or to keep pace at a lively party. It is a beer for winter evenings, for sipping thoughtfully from a small glass beside a fire, for those moments when you want warmth, richness, and depth, rather than easy refreshment. It rewards patience and attention, revealing its many layers only to those willing to slow down and truly taste it. It is the ale world's answer to a fine after-dinner sipping drink, contemplative and generous. Finally, after a whole night of bigger and bolder beers, let's end where a lot of real-life drinking actually happens, the light and easy end of the spectrum. After exploring the strongest, darkest and strangest beers on earth, it is only fair to celebrate the humble, everyday heroes, the light beers, session beers, and low-alcohol options built purely for easy, uncomplicated drinking. Light beers are brewed to cut calories and alcohol while keeping that crisp, refreshing character, which is why they cheerfully dominate long summer afternoons and backyard gatherings everywhere. Session beers are styles brewed intentionally weaker, so you can enjoy several over a long, lazy afternoon without ending the night mysteriously under a table. And these days, even alcohol-free beer has gotten shockingly good, proving you do not always need the buzz to enjoy the flavour. Let's begin with the light beer, the most quietly dominant beer style in much of the world. These are typically pale lagers brewed specifically to be lower in calories and lower in alcohol than their standard cousins, achieved by using fewer grains or special techniques that trim the body and the strength. The goal is a beer that stays crisp, cold and refreshing while sitting lighter on both your waistline and your head. Beer enthusiasts often dismiss them entirely, but there is no arguing with their staggering popularity. For enormous numbers of people, a light beer is simply the beer, the reliable default for a hot day or a casual gathering. The idea of a session beer is a little different and genuinely worth understanding, because it is more about philosophy than any single style. A session beer is any beer brewed intentionally to be lower in alcohol so that you can enjoy several of them over a long relaxed drinking session without becoming a mess. The term comes from the idea of a good long session at the pub, hours spent in easy conversation over pint after pint. A session beer prioritizes drinkability and balance above all, delivering enough flavour to stay interesting, but a low enough strength that the third or fourth one is just as pleasant as the first. This has led to one of the more delightful trends in modern craft brewing, the rise of the session version of bigger styles. Brewers realised that people loved the flavour of hop-forward beers but did not always want the strength that came with them, so they created session IPAs, beers that deliver all that juicy hoppy character in a lighter, lower alcohol package. Now you can enjoy the bright citrus and pine of an IPA across a whole lazy afternoon without paying the usual price. It is a wonderful bit of having your cake and eating it too, flavour and drinkability finally shaking hands. Then there is the alcohol-free beer, which deserves genuine respect after years of being the punchline of the beer world. For a long time, non-alcoholic beer was famously terrible, a watery, lifeless imitation that satisfied nobody. But brewing technology has advanced enormously, and today's best alcohol-free beers are shockingly good, capturing real flavour, body and character, while containing little or no alcohol at all. Whole breweries now specialise in them, and even hoppy styles translate beautifully. For anyone taking a break, driving home, or simply not in the mood, they finally offer a real satisfying option rather than a sad compromise. And there is a deeper point worth landing on as we reach the end of this enormous family tree. For all the glory of the giant imperial stouts and the barrel-aged monsters and the wild, funky sours, an awful lot of real happy drinking happens right here at the light and easy end. The best beer is very often not the strongest or the rarest or the most impressive, but simply the one that fits the moment, cold, refreshing, and shared with people you like. A modest beer on a warm evening among good company can bring more genuine joy than the fanciest bottle sipped alone. And that, believe it or not, is the entire family tree of beer, from the palest lager to the darkest stout finely laid out and explained. And there it is, the whole sprawling, foamy, faintly ridiculous family of beer, laid out from the palest whisper of a lager to the darkest, thickest stout in the room. Tonight we followed a single quiet decision, made by yeast too small to see, all the way out to its 1,000 delicious conclusions. We watched the crisp pilsner conquer the world, and the gentle helles refused to chase it. We sat with monks who brewed liquid bread to survive their fasts, and accidentally gave us some of the strongest, most magnificent beers ever made. We waded through hop bombs that taste like a fruit basket had an argument with a pine forest, and we found our way to cloudy wheat beers that somehow taste of banana without a single banana in sight. We met porters named after tired workers and stouts fit for an empress. We learned that dark does not mean heavy, that a beer black as midnight can drink lighter than something golden, and that appearances in the glass lie just as often as they do anywhere else. We wandered onto Belgian farms and into monastery cellars, tasted beer soured by wild air and beer made strange with salt, and ended gently right where most real drinking actually happens, a cold, easy pint shared with people you like. If there is anything to carry off to sleep tonight, maybe it is this. Every one of these beers began as somebody solving a small human problem, keeping water safe to drink, surviving a long fast, getting a beer to survive a sea voyage, rewarding tired workers under a summer sun. Nobody set out to build a grand tradition. They were just trying to make something good with what they had, and across 10,000 patient years, All those small efforts stacked into this enormous, glorious variety we can now pour on a whim. So the next time you hold a cold glass, whatever is in it, maybe give a quiet nod to the countless brewers who came before. The ones who guessed, who experimented, who trusted invisible yeast and open air and got it wonderfully, drinkably right. You get to enjoy the whole family tree at once. They only ever tasted their own small branch of it. For now, though, there is nothing left to figure out and know where you need to be. The long menu has been read. The glasses are empty. The bartender has finally stopped talking. Let your shoulders sink, let your breathing slow, and let the whole warm, golden, murmuring world of it fade softly into the dark. Rest easy. Sleep well. We will pour something new next time.